In 10 years working on AI, one of the questions I've been receiving the most has been, what should my children do? It's a question that people feel really on a visceral level, and typically it relates to things like education, the future of work, but increasingly also about the well-being. How can we ensure that we teach the next generation on how to use it successfully? In this video, I want to run you through the 4 areas where all evidence suggests will be important for any young person. If you're new here, I'm Pasquarelli. Spent the last 10 years advising governments and businesses on AI policy, including about youth development. If you're interested in understanding how artificial intelligence is changing the world and your life, make sure to subscribe, and let's get into this. Now, look at this. This is a student's brain on a test. For decades, we've measured success by output. Think of the grade, the finished drawing, the essay that you produced. But that output is now effectively becoming free. When a kid asks an AI chatbot for an essay on the Roman Empire, that language model gives them essentially an essay with a polished B+ grade. They're happy, the job is done. But neuroscientists are now sounding alarm about something called cognitive offloading. Cognitive offloading refers to when we're essentially giving machines certain tasks or certain mental processes that we would typically do ourselves. And it's nothing new. We've done that in the past. Think of, for example, remembering phone numbers. We now save them into our phones. We don't typically remember them anymore ourselves. But the evidence suggests that the less we activate certain neural pathways, the worse we become at fulfilling that particular task. Your brain builds its muscles, which are neural pathways, through something called desirable difficulties. The actual pain of trying to synthesize an argument is the very same thing that creates the architecture for original thought. And the research backs this up very clearly. For example, a 2025 study by Gerlich found a significant negative correlation between frequent AI tool usage and critical thinking ability. The more students delegated the task to AI tools, the worse they performed in independent critical thinking tests. But what's quite interesting is that another study by the University of Pennsylvania found that actually when students had to struggle with the material before using AI, their retention and engagement improved. So the AI actually helped them. It improved their ability. The key issue here is the sequence. Struggle first, then the tool. So what would I teach any young person? I'd make them think of themselves as being an executive. In business, when you outsource a project, you don't just walk away. Not if you still want to run your business. You project manage it. You set the criteria. You cannot just outsource a skill that you haven't mastered. If you do that, you're not just outsourcing, but you're doing effectively cognitive abandonment. And practically, this means one rule. Write first, then bring in the AI to challenge, to refine, and improve what you've already built. And if you're interested in understanding how AI is rewiring your brain, there's a separate video that we made on here. You can right-click on that, and then you should watch it later on. All of this just sounds good in theory, because we still need the right education. Now, I want to show you a graph that is currently terrifying every single white-collar worker I know. This shows essentially the potential levels of job automations for white-collar workers. So think of accountants, lawyers, marketing agencies, and so on. For the last 100 years, the more degrees you had, the safer you were, at least in theory, from automation. If your job involved high-level reasoning, law, accounting, coding, you were essentially safe. But then came something called Moravec's paradox. And the whole argument is that it's essentially infinitely easier to teach a machine to write a legal contract, which is just a digitized pattern of words, than it is to teach a robot to navigate a leaky, non-standardized basement and fix a pipe. But this is where it gets tricky, because right now, one of the arguments being made is that the plumber is essentially the safest person. But, and this is something that any young person needs to hear, there is something that I call the cliff theory. While for sure, manual jobs turn out to be a lot harder to automate than we previously assumed, think of self-driving cars or think of humanoid robots doing tasks for you in your home, there is major investments going on into these fields right now. Once a robot can reliably manipulate the physical world just like a human, then snap, the plumber hits the cliff too. What does it mean for you as a young person if you want to stay relevant? Across several industries, from finance, from material sciences, even from creative industries, there's a very similar pattern. In most of these experiments, scientists created 2 groups: top performers and average performers. When they were given AI tools, the top performers drastically increased their performance. The average performer wouldn't increase their output significantly. Now, why is that? Because the people who performed very well were not just better at using AI tools, but because they were able to discern. They were able to select the right outputs among infinite possibilities. Human excellence in conjunction with AI tools is the one thing that will help you advance as a young person in tomorrow's world. Now, what does this mean for how you should educate yourself? Some people say, oh, any kind of knowledge is going to be irrelevant. You shouldn't do any kinds of studies, become a generalist instead. And my answer is, Yes and no. The one thing that is going to be critical for anyone entering the workforce in the next few years is being able to think. So not just essentially absorbing outputs that an LLM produces, but being able to select the right ones, developing that taste, developing that judgment, so that once we get exposure to AI tools, we can then become a lot faster. Practice making decisions with incomplete information, because that's the one thing that AI will always struggle with. Not generating an answer, but owning the consequences of choosing one. And critically, do not anchor your whole identities to a single skill set. The plumber is safe today, but the coder was safe yesterday. The person who is safe today is the one who practiced learning itself. Now, take a look at these two videos. You can tell the difference anymore. And we've kind of moved past the area where we just teach children that you have to look for the 6 fingers in an AI-generated image. This is why we have to teach people something that is called the inoculation theory. At the Cambridge Decision-Making Lab, professors have found that the best way to protect someone from a lie is to give them a so-called cognitive vaccine. Now, what does that mean? Paradoxically, you don't teach people how to spot a fake, but you teach them how to make one. The Cambridge team have developed a tool called Bad News, where essentially you take on the role of a misinformation creator. Now, it sounds pretty weird, but across multiple countries, they found that participants were, as a result of that, much better at actually spotting fakes. And the logic is pretty simple. Just as a vaccine exposes you to a weakened version of a virus, a cognitive vaccine exposes you to a weakened version of manipulation. I'll teach any young person to build what I call a trust stack. Before you act on any piece of content, you run it through 3 filters. The first one is origin. So can you trace back a particular video to an accountable source? So not just a doctor says, but which doctor says that, from which institution, based on which publication. The second is a chain of custody. Has this clip been edited? Has it been chopped? Has it been recontextualized? And here there's something called the C2PA standard, and it embeds verifiable metadata of an image or a video of the point of capture, so where it was taken, by whom, at what time, etc. You can go to contentcredentials.org/verify, you drag and drop an image, and you can see exactly where it came from and what tools touched it. And the third one is incentive. Who benefits from you believing something? If you cannot answer that question, you're not just consuming information, but you're probably being consumed by it. But now we're going to get into the darker side of things. Everyone knows the iPad case, but the thing replacing it might be an AI chatbot. Have a look at this video of this tool called Gabo.
This is an actual AI-powered plush toy for adults and children.
Think of a toy that has a language model integrated in it, and that makes the whole experience for the child essentially more interactive because it responds. Now, the risk here is that, as some reports indicated, some of these toys that are AI-powered were discovered to provide inappropriate messaging to children. But there is also a deeper danger here. All of these tools relate to a space called AI companions. They're optimized for keeping people on the platform, always available and always affirming. And these companions offer so-called frictionless relationships. So they always tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what makes you feel good in that very moment. So teens might use these systems to avoid real-life, potentially anxiety-inducing scenarios, but in doing that, they might develop a distorted view of what intimacy is actually all about. And it's widespread. So my own research found that about 70% of young people have already used these AI companions for interacting on an everyday basis. But the issue becomes more problematic once they start giving advice and people start acting on them. If a young person spends the formative years in relationship building with a chatbot that never pushes back, always tells them what they want to hear, they don't really develop those social skills muscles that teach them what human relationships are ultimately all about. And there's a second layer to this that most people miss. Every confession, every vulnerable moment, maybe even question that a child might be too embarrassed to ask their parents, all of that is data, and it doesn't disappear. And that data could be taken by data brokers to create predictive profiles. So who are they, their political affiliations, their vulnerabilities, their mental health. All of this data sharing could account for 2/3 of identity fraud cases through deepfakes by 2030. So the practical rules here are twofold. The AI companions should never be the comforter. If done in, for example, a therapeutic setting, the evidence suggests that it can help us guide our thoughts and structure our thinking so that we realize our own decision-making by ourselves. But it should never tell you this is what you should be doing. Second, on the data trail and the privacy, the American Academy of Pediatrics now recommends every family to create a media plan. So think of a simple written set of norms about what gets shared by whom and when. Taking just these 15 minutes to do that might be one of the most consequential things you can do for your child's digital future. We are living through one of the most transformational periods of history, but children don't need to be victims of that. they can be stewards. Anyone who cares about the next generation, their job is not to help them beat the machine, but to help it navigate it. It's to help them stay human and to value those imperfect atomic human parts that no algorithm can ever replicate. Keep the struggle alive and stay human. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this content interesting, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.